Does the 4% rule make a good retirement plan? If you haven't heard of it before, the 4% rule is one of those simple personal finance rules. It's easy to understand, it's straightforward, and it's relatively accurate. But does it make a good retirement plan? In this video, we're going to look at what is the 4% rule, benefits of the 4% rule, problems with the 4% rule, and the 4% rule in retirement. My name is Owen. I'm an advice-only financial planner, a CFP, and I'm the founder of PlanEasy.ca, a financial planning platform that you can use to build your own financial plan and work with an advice-only financial planner. So the 4% rule suggests that you can spend 4% of your initial portfolio, adjusted for inflation every year, and over 30 years have a reasonable chance of success, a reasonable chance of not running out of money in the future. What this means is that if you start with a portfolio of $1 million, you could spend $40,000 a year for 30 years adjusted for inflation and have a reasonable chance of not running out of money in the future. You can also use this the opposite. So let's say you had a goal to spend $60,000 a year in retirement. You could work backwards by multiplying that amount by 25 or dividing by 4%, and that would give you a goal of $1.5 million for retirement portfolio. So the 4% rule you can use to both test your retirement plan and also create a retirement goal. So what are the benefits of the 4% rule? Well, it's simple, it's easy to understand, it creates a good rough goal, and it's relatively accurate. It's supported by quite a bit of academic research, unlike other personal finance rules of thumb. So if there's any personal finance rule of thumb you'd want to use, it's probably the 4% rule. Now, what are the problems with the 4% rule? So like every personal finance rule of thumb, there are some problems. One is that the original research only looked at 30-year retirement periods. And if you're retiring in your early 50s, mid 50s, or early 60s, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to have a retirement that's longer than 30 years. It could be 35 years or 40 years. This is where the 4% rule starts to break down. The second problem with the 4% rule is that it only really looked at investment returns without the drag of investment fees. So if you have investment fees of 1% or 2%, this is going to turn the 4% rule into the 3% rule or the 2% rule. Even low investment fees are going to create a little bit of drag on the 4% rule and might lead to a higher chance of failure. Now, the other problem with the 4% rule is that it only really looked at US returns. So although there's a lot of academic research to support the 4% rule, it's mostly based on US returns. So if you have a portfolio that includes global equities, global returns, you might have a slightly different success rate than the 4% rule. Now, the other problem with the 4% rule is it's quite pessimistic. It's based on the worst case scenario. It's a glass half empty type of personal finance rule, and chances are, if you follow the 4% rule, you're going to end up with a lot of money left over at the end of retirement. Now, the other problem with the 4% rule is it doesn't really adapt to changes in income and expenses in retirement. So if you're retiring in your late 50s and you expect CPP and old age security to begin, you might be drawing more from your portfolio in those first few retirement years. Then when CPP and OAS starts, you might reduce your withdrawal rate. Similar, if you have expenses that you expect will decline later in retirement, perhaps there's not much as travel or spending on hobbies, you might be withdrawing more in the initial retirement years, knowing that you're going to be spending less in your mid and late retirement years. The 4% rule doesn't really adapt very well for these changes in income and expenses in retirement. So does the 4% rule make a good retirement plan? Not really. It doesn't really adapt for changes in income and expenses. It doesn't include the drag of investment returns. And it also doesn't really adapt for longer retirement periods of 30, 35, or 40 years. So let's take a look at an example on the PlanEasy platform at an actual detailed retirement plan and what that looks like. So here we have an example of a retirement plan on the PlanEasy platform. In this plan, we've got $600,000 in RSP and TFSA. We're starting CPP at age 60, old age security at 65, and the goal is to withdraw $40,000 a year adjusted for inflation every year. And what we're looking at right now is a success rate of that financial plan. It's 93%. It includes global returns. And if we take a look at some of the income tabs, what we're going to see is that we've got registered withdrawals early on. Later, we've got TFSA withdrawals. We're taking into account the drag of income tax. And we're also including some benefits that this person might be eligible for in the future. So in this sense, the 4% rule, it's a little bit too simple to adapt to this type of retirement plan because it doesn't account for phasing in of these types of expenses. It doesn't account for higher withdrawals from maybe taxable accounts like a registered RSP. And it doesn't really account for potentially the government benefits they might be eligible for in the future. So we look at spending, we've got the same $40,000 a year all the way across as the 4% rule. But in terms of net worth, we're starting with much less. So this person has, $250,000 in real estate assets, probably a principal residence, and then they've got money in a TFSA and RSP. And this could be flip-flop between the two, but in general, they've got about $600,000. And the success rate is quite high, so it's 93%. It's over the 30-year period. But you can see there are some lines that do reach zero. So there is a risk of running out of money in the future, especially if this person were to perhaps live on into their early to mid-90s. So you can see that some of these lines are starting to trend towards zero, even if they haven't gotten there quite yet. So although we're looking at a 30-year retirement period here, there's certainly some longevity risk within this plan. Now, one of the things within this plan is that we haven't really adapted for a change in expenses. So we've assumed $40,000 straight across throughout the plan just to sort of illustrate the 4% rule. But if we make a change here to expenses, we go down and maybe at 75, we expect that spending is going to drop by about $6,000 a year. And we're going to do that all the way until the end of the plan. And that maybe represents a change in discretionary spending. It could be less travel, less money for hobbies. And so we're going to see now what that does to the retirement plan. And so here we have a drop in spending. We're going from 40,000 a year to 34, and that actually brings up the success rate to 100%. So this is where the 4% rule it's not really as dynamic as we need. What we need to look at is changes in income, changes in spending, and we need to test that over historical periods of investment returns to see, is there a risk of running out of money in the future? And there could be, but we can adapt to that in this case. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. We're coming out with new videos every week.